All right, discussing all of that and more. I'm joined now by the Daily Telegraph's political editor, Sky News host James Morrow, and contributor Kosha Garda. Well, welcome to you both, James. I'd like to start, if I can, with this decision in relation to Jerusalem. Sloppy, offensive, they're the terms that have been thrown around today. Certainly has the Israeli PM very angry, saying it's no way to treat an ally. But when it's applauded by a group like Hamas, you got to know something's wrong, don't you?
Well, something's very rotten with this whole thing, Peta. It's a terrible diplomatic blunder by a government which, credit where it's due, had been doing a reasonable job on its foreign policy since taking power. But it's not just Hamas, Peta. It's also Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which also called this a step in the right direction. These are people who are intransigent in their opposition to Israel's existence. They're appeasing people who will not be happy until Israel is eliminated and collapses. And yet, the left wing of the Labour Party, which has always had a big problem with Israel and has always taken the side of the Palestinians, seems to have won out and changed yet another Labour policy after the election.
This isn't just a change of government in Canberra, Kosha. We saw what happened in Washington. The Democrats take power from the Republicans. They didn't change the position Trump had on Jerusalem. I would chance my arm. This has a lot to do with votes in particular seats in the upcoming Victorian and New South Wales election, but it's disturbing.
Absolutely, it is. It really showcases how much political expediency is increasingly, ruling the roost in terms of how our leaders govern as opposed to principles. And I also think it depends on who you ask, because as James mentioned, Peta, this is a long-standing political divide across the left versus the right in the Western sphere. And for a little bit of added context, in the United States, the legislature, both the Congress and the Senate, in overwhelming support in 1995 passed the Jerusalem Embassy Recognition Act, which said that we're going to recognize Jerusalem, the U.S. would recognize Jerusalem as the rightful capital of Israel and move the embassy there. And every single president, from Clinton to Bush the Elder to W. Bush to Obama even, campaigned on that and never followed through until Trump. And it was in the wake of that Scott Morrison, followed suit. And it's just really interesting that this is bringing that back into the forefront. Despite that move, you're seeing politics reign supreme, and the fact that sort of party over country is something that we're seeing shine through here.
I've got to come to a pretty terrible story in Victoria today, James. A young man, just 36, a new dad, had some chest pains, called for an ambulance. It didn't turn up. I think they waited about half an hour. His partner drove him to the hospital herself, the 10-month-old in the back seat. He slipped into unconsciousness and later died. This is tragic, obviously, for this family, but it's happening too often in Victoria. Over 20 were counted at the start of the year, people that called an ambulance, waited for it, never arrived and later died. More staff, more money has been promised for months now by the Premier. This is harrowing.
Well, that's a horrible story, Peter. And you look at that, that family, you look at that, young woman, the baby, who are now left without a partner and a father, and it is just horrific. But this is happening all the time, and yet there's no accountability for Dan Andrews in any of this. There won't be at the next election, I don't think. And yet, I looked up some figures in the March quarter. I couldn't get any later than that, but in the March quarter, 1/3 of ambulances in Victoria arrived later than the hoped-for arrival time of 15 minutes. Now, you've been on the air tonight for more than 15 minutes. Imagine somebody having a heart attack or something like that over that period of time and waiting for an ambulance to arrive. It's not good enough, and it is just shocking that Dan Andrews is allowed to get away with it.
Yeah, front page of the Herald Sun here in Victoria, and certainly a talking point right around the state. Kosha, let's go to New South Wales. A group called ACON, the AIDS Council of New South Wales. Don't think it's just about AIDS. It's now a trans lobby group. It's diversified into national workplace policy. They're pushing hard today for the removal of the terms mother and father from the workplace. Now, given they're often paid by government departments to advise on HR issues, this is where the sort of insidious change starts, isn't it?
Sure is. And, Peter, I think it really illustrates the nature of power, where power always wants to expand and it always wants to creep into the culture in order to shore up its acceptance. But here's where I think this particular issue around the gender thing they might be overplaying their hand, the side that's a proponent of this, because there isn't a lot of support for it, and there's an awful lot of hubris, I would say, in that position, that they think they can deconstruct and reconstruct something that is handed down by Mother Nature herself, biologically, evolutionarily. And you see that in the rejection of these types of things from all sorts of people across the electorate, especially minority communities and ethnic communities. So we'll see where that goes, but it's definitely a battle that I think is being brought into the forefront more and more.
Yeah, but I will hazard to say, though, in these government departments, when they sign up to these policies, they become a fait accompli. You email someone in a government department now and you get all the pronouns coming back in the signature block. This stuff creeps and creeps, and no one in bureaucracy stands up against it. James, ABC, this is interesting. They've made a submission to the parliamentary inquiry into the National Anti-Corruption Commission. They're saying that the laws as they're drafted could impact the work of journalists.
And you know what? Mark your calendar here, Peta, because tonight's the night that James Morrow says the ABC has got something right. They are correct. There is a real threat here, I think, that this independent corruption commission, or whatever they're calling it, anti-corruption body that Canberra is coming up with, will wind up pulling journalists into its chambers here. It's happened before in WA in 2008, I believe. And the way this is worded, it's very, very loose. And there's a real danger. We've seen other freedom of the press issues here where the police have gone after sources. There's no reason not to think that the way it's currently being developed, this anti-corruption body couldn't wind up doing the exact same thing. And I think, good on the ABC for calling it out here.
Yes, and I will mark that in my calendar. Coach James Morrow, thank you as always.